This is the story of an old and unchanged Warwickshire flood meadow, known as Brook Meadow, lying on a mixture of sands, silts and gravel. In Shakespeare's time, in a hayfield, the dark purple blobs of the great burnet flower you can see here would have been a familiar sight. It's rare now in Warwickshire, but still grows happily in Brook Meadow. In Shakespeare's time, too, there were far more small meadows and ponds and woods and many more hedgerows. But today, our larger population has changed that older landscape to provide far more houses, far more industry, far more roads, and, unfortunately, far more traffic. Even the fields themselves have changed to become larger and more productive. But in Baker's Lane, near Knowle, the Cuttle Brook runs alongside an old and so-called unimproved flood meadow. Unimproved because Brook Meadow has not been drained or fertilised or ploughed and reseeded to grow more. So the many grasses and flowering herbs of Shakespeare's day still flourish here. The wavy, indented woodland edge to the meadow shows this pasture was probably cleared long ago from a less dense patch of the Forest of Arden. It's typical of historic pastureland in Warwickshire north of the River Avon. And now a look at Brook Meadow through the year will allow it to tell its own story. It's a long, thin meadow with the brook channelled straight along its western side. January may well find the meadow wrapped in snow, a glistening hoar frost gripping the trees. The snow shows up the meadow's uneven contours. On a sunny, chilly morning, it can all look like fairyland. Floodwater frozen over makes wonderful patterns. There is little indication at this stage of the number and variety of different plants hidden away in the quiet winter turf. When the thaw comes, water lies over much of the meadow, and the probable old channel of the stream before it was straightened can still be picked out. Often in February, a huge expanse of water lies across all the lower parts of the meadow. It looks almost like a lake. Brook Meadow is technically a flood meadow rather than a water meadow. Water meadows were artificially fed by irrigation channels from the stream alongside, and the water, by a kind of greenhouse effect, speeded the growth of the grass in winter. The water was then drained away by sluices when the grass had grown sufficiently to be grazed. Flood meadows, like Brook Meadow, on the other hand, were never irrigated, simply subject to the changing levels of the adjacent brook, generally bordered as here by alder trees with their cones and catkins. But soon the brook resumes its normal flow. The floods have now receded, and spring is on the move. Gradually signs of new life are breaking through. Leaves of the wood garlic are growing up fast. The willows are the first trees to break into tiny new leaf. some crack willows from which cricket bats can be made. Celandines and violets are among the earliest spring flowers. After the winter storms, some clearing up is always necessary. The white wood anemones and white blossom of the blackthorn lighten the grey hedgeline. But the weather in March is often cold with a harsh wind. That's why country folk talk of the blackthorn winter. During April, in the far wettest end of the meadow, a mass of kingcups rise up to make a glorious stretch of gold. They're also sometimes called marsh marigolds, and the local Warwickshire nickname for them is water blobs. The delicate mauve cuckoo flower is out when the cuckoo's song is first heard in the meadow, and it's bluebell time. This is the bulbous buttercup. Below the petals, the sepals are folded back downwards onto the stem. There are 3 different kinds of buttercup growing in Brook Meadow. The others are meadow buttercup and creeping buttercup. This is green alkanet, a large hairy plant. It grows by the hedge on the drier side of the meadow. Meadow foxtail and its tiny relation marsh foxtail are 2 of the early grasses to come into flower. Many insects make a home in the meadow too. Peacock and green-veined white, among other butterflies. Many moths and bumblebees. Shakespeare would have known it as a humblebee. The white wood garlic flowers by the brook smell strongly of onions. They look showy alongside the red campion. Kingcup flowers have now turned to beautiful glossy spiky fruits. And marsh forget-me-not has tiny blue flowers. One can see how meadow foxtail gets its name. The gold of the buttercups in May is gradually overtaken as common sorrel gives a rusty red glow to the meadow in June. Pignut has a white lacy flower and a tasty succulent root which the badger loves to dig up. Only the taller flowers can easily be seen above the many grasses which have now grown up, and so hide many of the smaller flowers, such as the purple knapweed. Molehills remind us of these unseen underground residents. Each mole keeps its own tunnel system and may eat more than half its own weight of worms in a day. Beetles, worms and slugs are all plentiful, so other shy mammals, though seldom seen, regularly frequent the meadow for food. Among these are water voles and shrews, as well as foxes and badgers. The brook is now shallow. The meadow is drying out. Hogweed flowers have already gone to seed. The hay is getting riper. Some of the grasses have memorable names. As well as the foxtails, there's crested dog's tail, lesser cat's tail, yellow oat grass, cock's foot, and the pinkish Yorkshire fog. The time is running out on this rich scene as the hay is now ready to be mown. The peaceful summer meadow is about to be transformed into a scene of noise and activity. When the hay is cut, many small insects as well as field mice lose the cover that was provided by the tall grasses and are prey to scavengers, such as magpies and foxes. The mown hay has to be turned to dry it, and it's hoped the weather will hold fair. With good sun and wind, the hay can be turned 2 or 3 times and baled and carried all within a few days. Let's watch the process for a while. very important that the hay is taken off the meadow yearly. This prevents the coarser grasses taking over and smothering the smaller plants. Many hands make light work with the haymaking, and there's a great sense of achievement when the last bales are safely carried. Speculation runs high as to how many bales, often around 250, from the 4.5 acre meadow. In August, the grass is beginning to green over again, and a few cattle are introduced into the meadow, an old practice known as aftermath grazing. The cattle play an important part in the meadow's ecology. They keep the grass down late in the year so that the smaller flowers will be able to flourish in springtime. They return some nitrogen, but not too much, to the soil, and as the ground gets softer, their cloven hooves make holes in the sward, good spaces for the tiny seeds they carry to lodge and grow. This cow is called Clover. She comes from Holly's farm further up Baker's Lane. The rhythmic grazing up and down the meadow soon tidies up the scene, and the cattle remind us there is an older and wiser pace of living than the motorway rush would have us believe. September is a gloriously peaceful month in the meadow, full summer quietly rolling into the ripeness of autumn. Fruits of sloe and rose hips and acorns are all colourful, but most vivid of all is the spindleberry. The fruit is beautiful, lobed and pink, and the seeds are brilliant orange. The seeds hang down below the opened fruit lobes like golden treasure descending under pink parachutes. Spindleberry leaves are bright red now too, making a dramatic collision of colour. Nearby, the soft colours of the wild pear, leaves and fruit, make a soothing contrast. Elderberries are plentiful, and a few late blackberries. But now autumn winds are blowing, and by October leaves are beginning to change colour and fall. St. Luke's little summer comes in mid-October to bathe the meadow in rich autumn sunlight. Brilliant blue skies make a lovely backcloth to the thinning trees. There's a sense of endings everywhere. The meadow is settling down to another quiet winter. The ancient meadows of Warwickshire and England, home to some of our loveliest wildflowers, have been disappearing fast. The few meadows that remain must be conserved. They need proper care and the traditional meadow management of spring growing, late haymaking, and aftermath grazing. And then it's hoped the fragile cycle of the turning year can long be maintained. Toadstools and rotting fruits remind us that the process of decay is a necessary part of the meadow's cycle after all the spring and summer activity. The oaks keep their leaves longer than any of the other trees. Even in November they can still be bronze and glowing. Lovely echoes of Shakespeare's Forest of Arden of long ago. But finally sharp frosts will be here again. All is stripped and bare, and now the meadow must wait patiently for another call to life next spring. It's the large number of different species growing together that make Brook Meadow so special. That's why it's scheduled as a site of special scientific interest. One of the last flood meadows now left in Warwickshire.